Welcome to Daisy Education, formerly Reading Solution UK's fourth annual International Reading Conference. My name is Basit Siddiqui and I'm honoured to once again be hosting this conference. As a passionate educator and lifelong learner, I know that I and everyone attending will get so much from this session and the conference as a whole. Now, for those of you who haven't heard of Daisy Education, they are an edtech company that provide opportunities for students to discover and develop a love of learning through their personalised online programs, Dreambox Reading Plus and Dreambox Maths. But they also love to support teaching and learning even further by hosting free accessible CPD events to educators worldwide. This conference is a perfect example of that. Now, I'm really excited that you've all joined us for this session with Alys Finch. Alys is Director of Education at Great Academies Education Trust, and her session is titled Reading as the Gateway to Excellent Learning, a Whole Organisation Approach to Reading. Please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A tab throughout, and we'll aim to answer all of them at the end of this session. The Daisy Education team will also be monitoring the chat and will share Alys's contact details should you have any follow-up questions. Without further ado, Alys, thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Really great to see you all. And hopefully this morning you'll get a bit of a sense of some of the things that we've done, both as a whole organisation level from a trust point of view, but also how we've thought about reading in our individual schools and even at an individual child and individual staff member level as well. What I'm intending to do in this session is share some of that piece of work that starts with why did we do it? Why was it a piece of work that we took as deeply and as significantly as the piece of work that we have done and that we continue to do? I want to give you a bit of a sense of practically how we implemented that, bit of a sense of the impact, so that it's not just about these are strategies, this is the impact it's had, and also just to give a little bit of a sense of the next steps that we're taking across our organisation. To mean that reading isn't just about reading, it's about accessing that whole curriculum and actually all of our learning experiences in our schools and beyond for students. There should be a bit of time for questions and answers at the end, so feel free to ask those as well. So just to think about the fact that we're talking about a whole organisation approach, there are three kind of key things within that for us here at Gate, where we've talked about Reading Plus as being the core of that literacy strategy, and I'll talk about why Reading Plus shortly. That idea of reading and its impact, not just on pupils' outcomes and their ability to read, but also on our culture in our schools, both around reading culture, but culture more broadly. And then, as I was saying earlier, that idea of reading improvement and what comes next. And there's a little bit there about the relationship between reading, writing and oracy. And I'll talk about that a little bit this afternoon. But key things are some practical next steps for you, an opportunity to think about reading both as a discrete strand and as an integral part of learning, and just for that opportunity to think about reading within literacy as that broader part of education in your setting. So our context, just so that you've got a little bit of a sense of us as a trust and a group of schools, to contextualise what we're talking about. So we're in Greater Manchester. I'm sat in one of our schools at the moment. So we're in Tameside and Rochdale. We've got 3 secondaries, 11 to 16 secondaries, 1 primary and 1 skit. So we have our own accredited teacher training provision as well. We work in really diverse communities, and that's diverse in its broadest sense. So every possible demographic measure you can think of, there is that diversity in our schools, but particularly notable levels of disadvantage in all 4 of our school communities. We also work really closely between our schools and other partners. So you'll see that in our skit relationships, but also in the relationship that we have with partners like Reading Plus. And just to kind of frame the work that we do, our values are really core to the work that we do, and particularly that idea of excellence and achievement being there in this reading agenda, but that together approach, whole trust, the fact that we respect the intelligence and experience of our colleagues and the experience that comes from outside, but also we respect the needs of our students and the needs of our staff to deliver what we need to do. And all of that comes from a genuine focus on wanting the best for the children in our schools and our communities. And for me, that also includes our staff. You can tell I'm an English teacher. There's far too much text on the slide, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavour of the rationale for our approach to reading. Reading sits very much at the heart of our approach to literacy. And for us at GATE, that is absolutely about the gateway to pupils' learning, development and success. But it's more than just them accessing that learning and that success and that development. We know that where reading gaps are closed, pupils attain better outcomes in tests and examinations. We know that there is a need to build on reading to ensure that all children make gains in their reading. Learning from our schools, research and best practice for developing literacy tells us that, and it tells us that we need to build on that research. We talk very much in our trust about oracy being the bridge between reading and writing, and I'll hopefully have time to talk about that a little bit this morning. But it's also that reading is that key strand in building the lexical capacity of our students, but also their quality of written expression. And when I talk about reading and its relationship with other aspects of literacy, that's partly what I'll be talking about there. It's also that focus on quality of written expression, which partly comes out of that lexical capacity building that comes out of reading, that is a key tool in enabling our pupils to achieve well. It's one thing enabling our children to know, remember, and apply more in terms of knowledge and their learning, but it's another in being able to express it as deeply as well as their actual knowledge and that their verbal or oral response might give us. But it's also about enriching that educational experience for our pupils, that piece that links to not just ongoing success and wellbeing, but also social emotional development, which especially I'm sure you're all finding in your settings. In the post-COVID world, it's that social emotional development gap that we're particularly thinking about. Our strategic aims from a literacy point of view are about closing the gap. They are about high quality outcomes, but they're also about enabling social mobility and giving our students the social fluency that comes from a fluency in literacy in its broadest sense, to be able to be engineers of their social mobility in their own learning. We want that ambitious learning and high attainment across our trust. We're a trust that's had a key emphasis on substantial school improvement over the past 5 years in particular, but actually that high attainment isn't just for pupils, it's for our staff. It's enabling people to do their jobs even better. That idea of literacy being a key mechanism for building, modelling and ensuring high expectations and challenge. We want our children to be proud of their heritage, of their context, of where they come from, but we also want them to know that they deserve the best that they want for themselves, as well as what their community wants for them. And then that profound culture of learning for all pupils and all staff. And hopefully I'll be able to give you a little bit of a sense of some of that staff piece of work around that as well. The how of the curriculum. Reading is very much an enabler of the how of the curriculum. And actually the work that I'll talk about in terms of reading very much links to that practice that we have as teachers in terms of what am I doing? What am I looking for? What does quality learning look for? How do I know that children's reading is developing? And what precise, impactful developmental feedback am I giving? And Reading Plus has been really key for us with that in terms of reading in particular. So literacy, I know that it sounds like an obvious thing to say, but I think, again, this is an important piece of work, especially if we're thinking about reading, but having that really clear understanding of what we mean by literacy. In our trust, it absolutely is about fluency, reading, writing, speaking and listening, but it has to be more than that. That fundamental fluency, reading, writing, speaking, listening, oracy, is how we enable academic fluency, critical and interpretative fluency, that idea of actually how can we enable our children and young people to engage meaningfully, but have control over their engagement with not just text, but information more broadly in the world around them. That cultural fluency in capital. Actually, we can't assume that some of that broader enriched knowledge, that hinterland knowledge, is there for all of our pupils. Reading is a core way of creating that cultural capital, and that social and emotional fluency. When I talk with staff about reading and about the power of books, for me, it's about giving our children and young people access to worlds that they may never live in, ideas that they may never have themselves, but that we want them to be conversant with. We want them to have a vision of the world that comes from that broader knowledge and understanding, and reading is a gateway to that, as well as a gateway to the rest of their learning in school. So why reading? Why did we go for reading first? And why did we decide on some additional resource? And there has been significant investment in reading. And I don't necessarily mean financially. There absolutely is a financial cost. And we've been really canny at how we've used things like the Right to Succeed funding, PEIA funding, so that Priority Education Investment Area funding, but also additional resource in terms of how our Trust Central team's been deployed in schools, but also how we've enabled schools to really prioritise reading and actually have it as well in your order of priorities, really prioritise the time, that resource, spent on and with reading. The overarching why for us then in terms of reading. Reading's a key priority for the children that our trust serves. We know that reading is a key barrier for our most disadvantaged pupils in terms of them accessing learning, but also as well as that role of literacy in developing curricular, cultural and social capital for them. We want the children in our schools to leave us independently able to design and lead their own futures. Reading is fundamental to that. We've just been doing a piece of work on parent communication in our trust. When we've looked at the information that we have in at least one of our local authorities, the average reading age of parents in our secondary schools is about age 11. The average reading age of our parents in primary is about age 8. And most of the documents that get sent out to our parents when we've been looking at them have had a reading age of 15. Well, actually, we want to be in a position where the children in our schools, when they become that next generation, have had some of that gap closed for them. In primary in particular, that additional resource for us has been about the quality and range of resource, really strong approach to reading in our primary school, but also we also know that capacity can be a real challenge in primary schools. Primary schools tend to have quite tight staffing. We know that our staff have multiple responsibilities, not so that we don't in secondary, but certainly in primary, that is absolutely the case. But we wanted to have that sense of supporting children's reading as part of their wider literacy work. Again, those of you who are working in primary contexts particularly will have seen that gap that has happened around pupils' speech language communication development post-COVID, because they weren't in the same kind of range of settings and context to develop that skill. In secondary, it's been very much about improving outcomes, particularly at Key Stage 4, but also to improve the offer around reading. We knew that actually there had been a dip in some of our pupils' reading abilities joining us from primary. That COVID gap, partially because of that missing of Key Stage 2 SATs and that really sharp focus of applying reading skill in a particular assessment context, we wanted to make sure that we closed that gap. But also, you know, we have a significant cohort of students reading well below their peers, so much higher than national average, and year on year that we've seen an increase in that. So it was partly providing that additional resource to meet this primary need that was emerging. And that was a primary need across most groups of students, I think, and it's crucial to say that. Reading Plus. So in a sense, I've just outlined our big picture of why reading, why think about additional resource. And I want to talk specifically about Reading Plus, because it's been a commitment that we've renewed post PEIA funding and post Right to Succeed work and some of the continuation of Right to Succeed. Reading Plus has absolutely been for us a trust-wide decision. We'd heard and seen Reading Plus's impact on reading. We wanted to make sure that our schools understood that for us as a whole trust, and it's not a central team in the schools, the trust is our schools, that for us as a trust, this was so important that we wanted to have a common language for how we were going to talk about intervention in particular, but also that universal offer around reading and how Reading Plus fits into that. In terms of the implementation piece, we didn't go every single child in every single school immediately. We did use an initial pilot, and part of that was if we're going to invest time, money, staffing, curriculum space in this particular project, is it going to have the impact we want it to have? And that initial pilot was crucial for that, but also crucial in terms of thinking about what the implementation model needed to look like and how bespoke that might need to be for each school. Our schools are all quite different sizes, have slightly different contexts in terms of structural organisation with staffing, and we want to be able to have that core understanding before we took that whole trust approach. And then also on a really practical level, we wanted to manage the workload of staff. We wanted to ensure quality, and we wanted the focus of our staff to be on maximising impact rather than from scratch developing an approach. So it was very much around that staff workload, staff wellbeing point of view. And actually, an interesting thing that came out of that last bullet point was also about how we sometimes assume that all of our staff are really confident readers and really confident in supporting reading. And actually, sometimes they're not. They might be perfectly proficient, but their confidence in reading might be low. Their own relationship with reading might be something we need to develop. And for those staff who are really confident and really able and really implicitly focused on reading, it also gives an opportunity for them to become consciously competent. Those of you who've looked at Johari's windows will know about that sort of conscious competent box of actually being able to translate their practice, their expertise into the practice of other staff and also the children that we work with. I know there are a few things coming up in the chat. We'll come back to them towards the end of the session. So thank you. Please keep those things going. So how did we implement it at scale, but meet local need and context? So as I've said, following that pilot phase, our whole trust approach was about making sure that the implementation was bespoke to their schools. And part of that was grounded in logistical feasibility. Part of that was linked to manageability in terms of the number of priorities that we work on in school. But there are just a few examples that I thought it'd be useful to share with you. So in our smaller secondary schools, there's probably about 1,000 children in that school. They'd actually trialled read theory during the COVID lockdowns when they were teaching remotely and wanted to roll it out to their whole school. So they had done some playing around with a slightly different system. Their decision around Reading Plus that we then sort of thought about as a whole trust was about the fact that Reading Plus was more fluently packaged in terms of an adaptive reading programme. So at that point, that had been sourced by somebody in the central team to play with. Initially, that school piloted it with a cohort of year 9. And the impact was the key thing in the decision to roll out whole trust, whole school. And actually, it was substantial and significant gains for that cohort. And year 9 were trialled because they had been, at that point, they were the gap who'd missed a substantial part of upper key stage 2 during COVID. So they're now our current year 11s. That was kind of where we were. And it was that led to our whole trust purchase of the package. So they've been using Reading Plus for 3 years now. So they're quite an established school. At Great Academy Ashton, where I am now, Reading Plus had come up in their research around having the potential to develop fluency and passage comprehension. So there were 2 key barriers here, not just fluency, but the depth of comprehension for students. I would say pretty typical with weaker readers, but particularly here. And actually, we wanted it to meet the core issue for the majority of our readers in this school. There is additional intervention for phonics in this school, but Reading Plus was there to tackle the biggest group of readers who needed support. I think for us as well, and this is absolutely true across the whole trust, the range of reading material available was really important to us. Reading Plus has then sparked substantial investment in library facilities. It sparked a whole reinvention of the reading sign in a number of schools. And actually, students could select what they were interested in. That was really important to us. The key thing for us was the vehicle needs to be one, the text needs to be one that children want to engage with. And then we think about the processes for enabling them to use that text as the way to develop their learning. As well, we didn't just want to target, and in that school, then this opened it up for the rest of the trust. We didn't just want to target our weakest readers. We wanted our most able readers to be sustained, fed, have that enjoyment approach, that autonomy over their own reading, but also to be challenged. And Reading Plus gave us that. And interestingly, we'd used an accelerated reader at GAA and found that it hadn't given the amount of progress that Reading Plus was giving us. And I'll talk to you about actually some of the hard numbers of that progress shortly. And GAA is a substantial school. So Copley's got about 1,000 children in it. GAA is sort of nudging towards 1,400, 1,500. Middleton, our third secondary school, probably has about 1,300, 1,400 students in it. And again, them very similar reasons to choose Reading Plus and trial it, then roll out wholesale to the other two secondaries. But actually, they were finding that sort of, I was going to say Netflix, but other streaming providers are available. That Netflix style of being able to select and choose and go back really helped with pupil engagement there, because pupil engagement was a key challenge to meet there. But again, reading age, actual age, and that supportive reading pain being really important there. I do want to talk about primary, because primary, that's what I mean about that whole trust all through approach. Reading has been a key school improvement priority in our primary, used not just within the context of Year 6 SATs. Reading Plus has been absolutely fundamental to us thinking about whole school reading approaches, to thinking about that high quality bank of resources. And really importantly, Silver Springs had identified that the CPD modules that sit inside Reading Plus were really helpful to them. It was high quality, well designed, really focused on impact. And that piece around staff workload has been crucial in the decisions that we've made. I think the key thing to note as well, the fact that there is that global database means that comparative database is substantial. We can think about impact in a really deep and meaningful way through that substantial database. And I think that that's important. That implementing it on a more practical level as well, each of our schools took a slightly different approach. So at Copley, we had a literacy lead who is part of the English department, who then trained the English department to deliver that programme based on the observations from that initial pilot phase. It was then added into the whole curriculum to think about it being not just a discrete intervention, but actually having a really secure, prominent place in the curriculum. That ongoing training has been crucial in that school, but also the use of the Reading Plus data and wider reading data now sits inside the way that we approach intervention for academic intervention. But also this year we've moved into the phase of looking at reading data alongside attendance data. So actually we're thinking about some of that, those barriers to accessing the curriculum and how we can use our reading approaches in our schools to improve attendance. There's an impact report in that school on a termly basis. But the key thing in that school is to make it not just training that is for the discrete programmes that are used in that school, but training around literacy in the curriculum in a broader sense has been fundamental in the literacy lead leading regularly CPD sessions that link to that. In that school, a reward system was developed to go alongside Reading Plus to really look at that idea of recognition around reading. And what that now looks like 3 years on is that all students in Key Stage 3 have a 1 hour lesson a week dedicated to Reading Plus. And actually that means that we can accelerate some of the learning in some of our other curriculum time, because we're not having to pick up the gap of access that comes from a real paucity in reading ability from students. It comes out of English curriculum time because the benefits are so significant that it warrants that, as I've said. There is an expectation that students do at least 30 minutes on Reading Plus for homework each week. And in that school, we know that access to devices can be a challenge. So we make sure that children who need devices get them. But then there's also all of that links to the Academy Rewards system. So for 5 comprehension and 1 vocab task at 80% or more each week, there's a set of rewards that come through that. And that success is celebrated in assemblies alongside all the other achievements that we recognise. And then on a half-termly basis, we look at kind of the leaderboard students, and that competitive element has worked really well for them there. At Great Academy Ashton, it is curriculum delivery. It's not an intervention. So we've shifted from an interventionist approach to a curriculum delivery approach here. All students in years 7, 8 and 9 have an hour a week dedicated to independent reading. All EAL arrivals in this school, so there's a high percentage of students with English as an additional language at Great Academy Ashton, and actually it's part of our supporting and onboarding of those students. The key thing here is we know that a lot of staff at this school in particular have children in our school, but also have children who aren't in our school. And in that school, staff are given logins for their children as well. So it's not just for their development, it's for that wider community development as well. And then in our third secondary school, just to give you a bit of a sense, all year 7, 8 and 9 classes who have additional needs. So their groups are organised slightly differently for classes there. And we identify those children as needing additional support where it's 2 years or more below their actual age, their reading age. That's around 6 classes. And they have Reading Plus as part of a timetabled session. But children who have additional need outside of that core group of most need, and students who want to engage additionally, they offer it as an extracurricular sessions. They have 1 lesson a week that they call electives that is almost like an extracurricular lesson that links to Reading Plus. That's just about Reading Plus, but Reading Plus was then the model for how we've rolled out that reading strategy approach. So the reading strategies that we've taken link into the work in Reading Plus, so that we're using one model. Cognitive load is rationalised, staff workload is rationalised, and then we've taken it into whole staff CPD in all 4 of our schools to look at how we make sure that those strategies that children are learning in intervention and curriculum reading time are used more broadly. The other key thing is that we've really focused not just on reading ability and reading proficiency. Pleasure in reading, enjoyment of reading has been absolutely core to what we've done. So all of our schools include timetabled, carefully prepared, well curated reading time in the schools. Staff read with children. Children read to each other, with each other. We're at the point where we're developing reading mentors in each of our schools to be able to share that love of reading between students. And some of that text choice has been about broadening cultural capital, enabling engagement because it's a text that children want to read, but also taking suggestions from our students and from our staff. So that actually that pleasure in reading is really important. If you were to walk around the school that I'm sitting in now, you will see that every office door, every classroom door, at the end of every email is what the staff are enjoying reading at the moment. And you'll hear those conversations between staff and colleagues. I mean, just a slight anecdote. Yesterday evening, I was just leaving the building, bumped into 2 of the staff in one of our schools, and we had a really brilliant conversation about the books that we'd recently read, and would we use that with students, or would we recommend it to each other? If you like this kind of thing, try that. That's the culture now in our schools, and it's taken us 3-4 years to build the depth of that. But now if you were to walk into a lesson in our schools, you'll see teachers of all subjects talking about approaches to reading, how to interpret text using the rubric of exams. Actually, what is important about us understanding where this writer is coming from, as well as pure comprehension, pure decoding as well. The key thing for us has been measured, planned, in small chunks, scaling up gradually. And part of that scaling up gradually was that we didn't want to have any false starts, and we didn't want to undermine the culture that we were developing by rushing through a system. So that careful appreciation, constant feedback. When our literacy leads meet, they talk about what they need to tweak around implementation. And I'll talk about that a little bit as we move into the talking about reading and its place in the wider place of literacy anyway. But I've talked about some great things about how we've done it, what we've done, but really what impact has it had. So the scores on the doors, I've gone through all 4 of our schools here. The key thing to note is the impact of Reading Plus and reading more broadly on pupils' reading progress, engagement, and crucially for us, enjoyment. That was one of the key things in terms of learning culture in our schools, has been significant and substantial. And the key thing is it's being sustained over time. And that sustenance over time has partially come from that approach that we've taken that has been right thing, right time, right pace, and making sure that it wasn't just an add-on, it was integral to the approaches we were taking around teaching and learning, and it was integral in terms of the approaches that we've taken at a school level and a whole trust level in thinking about data outcomes and intervention. Outcomes for us aren't just about how students do at the end of Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 4. They are also about, do they enjoy and do they feel confident reading, and how we measure that qualitatively through pupil voice, pupil survey, lesson visits, qualitative feedback, all of those things. Reading Plus has been and is and will remain the cornerstone of our approach to literacy across our trust, but it is so much more than that now, and Reading Plus really enabled us to get to the heart of that. So those scores on the doors demonstrated key progress at Copley. NGRT data, so those national tests, also shows measurable impact alongside the reading data within that whole reading offer within the school. Middleton Tech, you can see some key numbers there. The key thing is substantial gains in small amounts of time, particularly in year 7. So actually, Reading Plus has enabled us to maximise that gain in that school. Silver Springs, which is our primary school, the impact of Reading Plus is there in the year groups and it's used in which it was being used. So actually, they've gone from just using it in a couple of year groups to from year 3 and upwards. And actually, the Key Stage 2 outcomes that we're now getting in that school are above national, and they have a significantly higher than national average proportion of students with special educational needs and high level literacy need in that school. So actually, it's been absolutely key to making us be able to do that. You haven't got an example there, but there is an impact case study that Reading Plus have that will give you that information, or do feel free to get in touch. But current year 6, so those who have just sat their SATs, it's enabled us to close substantial gaps for those students and really help to secure for the vast majority of students at least expected, but an increase in expected greater depth students as well, and that's with the group of students of high level need. Great Academy Ashton, I've deliberately kind of put them last in a way because they very much led a lot of our work around reading across the trust. But I think this is really important. So this is a school where between 40 and 50% of children in current year, well, in the current cohorts are lower prior retainers, poor attendance, nearly 50% free school meals in this school, high number of EAL students. And actually, just to give you a sense of some of the scores on the doors there, actually, there is substantial gain over those 10-month periods. And the key thing for us is the +4 levels average gain in standard assessment scores across Key Stage 3 and NGRT. That's been substantial here, and what we're now seeing is that begin to have an impact on year 11 outcomes. Students are able to not just access learning but respond to learning. We all know that in Key Stage 4, our weaker readers tend to perform less well on word-based reasoning problems in maths. Actually, this piece of work on reading has enabled that substantial improvement in mathematics in particular. It's also really important that one of the reasons that I've shared that there is it's one of our more recently Ofsted visited schools, and reading was very much seen as being one of the sort of shining lights of progress. Having been a key area for development 2 years ago in this school, it's now being recognised at a local regional level to share with other schools locally, but also the substantial improvement rapidly in the school. And part of that is the work that you're seeing represented there in those scores isn't just about, and it's the same with all 4 of our schools, isn't just about reading intervention. It's been about using reading intervention as a starting point for a shift in whole school reading culture, and every single lesson you go into having some link back to that work on literacy, because we're all teachers of language and we're all teachers of literacy. And that for us has been really key. And CPD for staff, to enable them to be those confident readers, to be able to share their own strategies for improving reading with their students. That openness, that professional vulnerability, we're learners too, has been really fundamental to that whole school and whole trust change in our schools. It's probably been it is one of the most important things we've done in terms of school improvement as a school, as a trust and as schools. So impact on learning culture, bit of a cliche for you, but culture is definitely eating strategy for breakfast. For us, strategies were one thing, but if the feeling about reading didn't change, we weren't really changing the thing that was going to be the long-term change for our learners in our schools. If you were to sit down and talk to groups of students in our schools and say to them, so talk to me about your form time reading. I'll say, oh, I've really enjoyed this book because, or I didn't really enjoy this book because of this, this and this. But I've really found out about this. That license for students to talk about themselves as readers and be informed in their critical response to what they're reading has been really fundamental for us, and the confidence it's given our students to then be able to look in more depth at those other aspects of literacy. So reading improvement, great. Reading improvements on the tracks. Everything's going really well. That's brilliant. But what comes next? And this is where we are now as an organisation, and the way that we're working both as individual schools, but as a whole group of literacy leaders across the trust. And I'm really privileged in my role to be able to share that great practice between our schools and outside of our schools, but also to lead that work, linking the work that we do together. So a little bit of and this is very much an English teacher diagram. So those of you who aren't English specialists, please give me a little bit of forgiveness for the diagrams I'm about to show you. But before I show you that, I think it's really important to share that strategically, literacy has not just been led by, and has not only been led by, and in some cases has not been led by, English specialists from our English department. In all of our schools, we've selected the person who could be the best advocate for reading, who has the capacity to develop others to be able to do that piece of work. And that doesn't mean that others in the organisation haven't got that, but we've really thought about what's the message in each of our individual schools that we've wanted to give. Driving it through English at Copley was absolutely the right thing to do. Driving it through the SEND inclusion team at GAA was absolutely the right thing to do. And we've got a geographer who leads literacy in this school, who has done really brilliant things in terms of that cross-curriculum piece of work. And again, that constantly evolves as more and more staff become both skilled but also passionate. And if you are thinking about who should lead it in your school, be driven, be led by who is going to be the passionate advocate for it, but also the influencer for it. Actually, who's going to bring those other staff on board? That's a bit of a side note, really, but I think important to say. So reading improvement, what comes next? So there are three key aspects to what comes next for us, and they're these things here. So fundamentally, there is a process-driven way of thinking about where reading fits. For me, when I talk with our schools, we talk about mutually enhancing processes and how we can use one of those aspects of pure literacy, functional literacy, I suppose, fluency in literacy to drive the other areas. Reading and listening have a relationship with each other. At a really basic level, they're both decoding activities. Actually, the frameworks that we use, the processes we use for reading absolutely work for listening. More and more, the work that we're doing in our schools here is about how we explicitly teach children to listen. That's both about culture in the classroom, it's about behaviour, but it's also about actually students don't know how to do a thing if we don't teach it to them, and they don't get better at it if we don't teach it. How do we make explicit? I think actually in many respects the most implicit of the areas of literacy, which is that listening piece. If I know what I'm listening for, I know what I'm reading for, that kind of relationship as well. Writing and speaking are there together as encoding activities. And to some extent, I think that's about the idea of, again, it's process. The writing process maps really neatly onto the speaking process. We're constructing something, we're putting something together. So actually thinking about writing and speaking in the same sort of way, how can speaking be a way of practicing and thinking about writing? That's very much a space we're in now, and I'll talk about oracy in a moment. But also that opposition of those mutually enhancing processes. If I know what I'm looking for as a reader, I know what I need to produce as a writer. If I know what I've done constructively as a writer, I know what I'm going to look for as a reader. And some of that is giving real power and ownership to our students over both of those processes. They're not just responding to somebody else. They're using their own construction or deconstruction to be able to engage with that other person. Some of the best examples I've seen have been teachers using use these pieces of a text to create your own text. What questions did you ask yourself as a writer? Right, now go and apply them to this actually superficially challenging text. It's a pre-20th century text. It's an historical source. It's a text that is very loaded with specialist language. Actually, that gives me some power as the reader or as the writer to own that. And I think this is kind of sort of scratching the surface of this piece, but this is how we frame our discussion around literacy, including within the context of a lesson, where are the opportunities to exploit those 4 processes for students, irrespective of the subject that you are teaching. And actually, to some extent, that mapping onto a subject like maths, for example, if I know how to deconstruct this mathematical process, this mathematical method, I know how to construct something. We've been doing quite a bit of work in maths about challenge being set what you think is a really difficult problem. And that empowerment of students to use the skills they're developing. So I said that I would mention oracy as the bridge between reading and writing. For us, this has been very much about what are the barriers to our students writing well and wanting to write. And one of them is the fear of putting it on a page. There is something very permanent, very definite about putting a piece of paper or a bit of type onto a sheet. To some extent, oracy being that rehearsal opportunity for writing, that space between we've read this, we've done this finding out. How are you going to put that into practice as a writer, or how are you going to show your knowledge that you've gained from reading in a writing context? Speaking and listening has been absolutely key to that. And that might be something as simplistic as, before you write in your book, draft on a whiteboard, you can wipe it off, it's not permanent. Work in a small pair, or it won't be a small pair if there's 2 of you, work in a pair or in a 3. One of you is orally giving your response. One of you is transcribing it. In the school I'm sitting in now, pedagogically, we call that talk to transcribe. And then actually I've got my first draft, and then I haven't got to focus on what am I going to say. I'm then focusing on how I say it really well. So actually that deconstruction that we do at a really minute level when we're teaching reading, let's approach writing in the same way, but let's use speaking and listening as the way to do that minute piece of work to build up for students. And that's students of all abilities. Actually, we want to be able to challenge our students to use high-level vocabulary really well. We want to challenge our students to, that's great, but even better, as well as the confidence that it gives students. That's a very light touch on that piece around oracy as the bridge between reading and writing, but perhaps something to go away and think about with your teams, which I'm sure you already are, but thinking about it in a really precise pedagogical sense as well. And then lastly, that third area of where next is about exploiting and extending those reading skills, knowledge and understanding. We've made our students better readers. We are making them better readers. Through that reading, they're gaining knowledge. How do we push that even further? Where are the opportunities for children to construct their own knowledge from their reading? Here are 3 pieces of information. Each of you in your 3 has a different piece, and I might tailor which text which students get, but actually them then constructing their own knowledge rather than just responding to the knowledge that we give them. I think that can be really powerful. That exploiting and extending those reading skills, knowledge and understanding is also about getting over the myth of there are texts that are hard to access. They're hard to access because we don't give children the right way in. With some of the weakest, lowest level literacy students that colleagues have worked with, we've seen colleagues really successfully use things like Jonathan Swift's modest proposal to look at social satire and policy setting. Actually, it's a hard text for a whole host of reasons, not least because the language can be unfamiliar, but actually we've got a process for reading. Actually, I'm asking you to listen to it be read to you as well as follow the text. Actually, we're still reading. I'm using those listening skills to enable that reading, for example. But also, how can we extend their reading skills with things as simplistic as, if you liked this, read this. Oh, actually, we've been exploring this in history. Here's a text that goes really nicely with it. I was talking with a colleague yesterday about the work that we do in science around the rise of ethics and that component of science, and sharing some work around actually Frankenstein as a text is a really good companion text to looking at the Humphrey Davy Royal Society lectures that are happening around the same period of time. But actually, there's a really nice link between scientific development and scientific exploration of the relationship between the ethical and the scientific, not that they have to be mutually exclusive. What's happening in terms of literature and playing with literature, but also the idea of those history topics that look at medicine over time. Immediately then, I'm extending those reading skills, that reading knowledge for my students. Actually, I'm giving them some of that cultural capital, which is fundamental to them moving forwards, as well as in different contexts, these are the skills that you might need. What that fundamentally comes back to, though, for me, is absolutely about the fact that reading fundamentally didn't come out just of our children need to read better. Reading came out of what do we want for our children? What do our children deserve? And how do we help them to navigate the world that they're going into? We're living in a digital age. We have never asked people to process as much text as they are now, particularly on screens. We're in an age of a range of different forms of information and reliability, the relationship with AI, and how do you know that what's been given to you is quality or not, or has efficacy, or has any bias in it. All of that for me comes down to the fundamentals of reading. And that's why it won't ever stop being a core priority for us as a trust. It won't ever stop being a thing that I want to have a conversation with every member of staff about. And actually, it won't ever stop being a conversation that we need to keep coming back to as the context of what reading means develops and evolves over time with the world that we're moving into. Thank you for your attention.
Alys, yeah, we've got some decent time for some questions, but thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. So many fantastic points that I've written. I've got, let me just count how many I've got. 1, 2, 3, 4 pages of my own notes from it. So I was scribbling away. I think what really stood out for me, though, was your passion, but also your trust passion for seeing reading as something for that child. And you hit the nail on the head, the way the world's moving and just getting them ready, that culture capital, that fluency, and how they can apply it in loads of different situations. Would you say that helped with the buy-in with creating this culture around your staff as well? When you started to look at reading at this holistic approach, did that get that buy-in?
Absolutely. And it partly got that buy-in because it became both an intentional, explicit conversation, whether that's right, we're doing our standards meeting once a term with the principal and the chair of governors, right? What's the impact of reading? Where are you going next? Have we really, is it, who else do we need to be thinking about? Not just the bottom 20% of readers, but it also becomes incidental in every conversation that we have. So when our networks meet, we talk about reading. We talk about the implications of reading and its applications. If you're having a snatched conversation with somebody about a lesson that you saw that picking up on, it was great to see you use this strategy from the Freya model, which is a key model in all of our schools. But I think us demonstrating it all the time has been really fundamental.
Yeah.
So that it wasn't just it's a thing we want you to work on.
It's so intentional at every level, isn't it? And that has come across. And I loved when you shared when you're deciding on who leads on these different strategies, it isn't necessarily an English specialist as well. You choose that person who's demonstrated the skills and the passion for it, the geographer, for example. So honestly, I could go to town on everything that I got from that. So thank you so much. But I am keen that I want to make sure we go through as many questions as well. So I will say before we get started as well, at 3 p.m. today, we've got a Q&A session with Ian Fitzpatrick from Reading Solutions. If you've got any questions for that, feel free to throw them into the lobby if you can make it, and then we'll add as many Reading Plus questions there as well. So with that in mind, Matt started us off. How long did this take, Reading Plus in brackets, to implement across all schools until it was running and showed success? Because it is such a brave thing to do, to trial these things and then to measure success. But how long would you say it was in terms of that before you started to think, yeah, we're onto something here?
Yeah, I would say partly because of the the really rapid tracking and testing that you can do, you can relatively quickly see that impact. So within a term, we were seeing impact on students. Within short blocks of 6 weeks, we were seeing impact on students. In terms of it being across all schools, showing success, us talking about it in the way that we do, I would say that the first phase of that was that first year. And now it is just a thing that we talk about all the time. And I think that there's a question slightly later on around how often do you come back to it? All the time. So we come back to it in formal settings at least once a term at a headship level. When we look at self-evaluation and work with other leaders, we look at it in terms of when we meet as literacy leads, which is 2 or 3 times a year. We look at it when we're looking in any focus of lesson visits, would usually have some kind of, oh, I can see that you're using these strategies here. So it doesn't stop because it's been a thing and it's going really well. We don't stop coming back to it. And the coming back to it also comes through that next step of iterations, that oracy piece that we're now working on across the trust as well.
Fantastic. So still, when you look at it and the amount of schools that you've got, that's not that long, but I think you've kind of had that bravery to go with that. A question here, did you find reluctance from any school/heads? How did you manage that? Now, in answering that question, almost on your behalf, the culture clearly seems to matter here and celebration, but is there anything else that you wanted to add to that as well?
I think the key things, the key questions, and they're good questions for heads to ask, and they're the questions that I ask back to our heads as well, and our finance director, I would hasten to add. The key questions from heads have been, how can we be financially sustainable when finance is tight? How can we make sure that it's having the right impact, and how can we make sure that it isn't just an add-on? We're not just asking for more. And that wasn't because there was necessarily particularly reticence. For heads, it was, we need to know that it's working or we're not going to carry on doing it. So some of that management of that has been a commitment to schools to be able to say, if it isn't working, we won't do it. We won't carry on with it. If it is working, then we look at where that fits in terms of actually, is there a financial efficiency that comes from using something like Reading Plus, which is the hours that could be spent on developing that scheme aren't spent. That's not teacher hours that are being spent doing that. They're being spent doing other really important work as well. So there's that. And I think as soon as that impact was being demonstrated, and that's where almost having kind of that early adopter, small pilot, then you develop your advocates as well. But one of the things that's been important to us to do has been to empower our other senior and middle leaders who lead on these projects to be able to be influential with their heads as well. And it's my job to support not just our heads in our schools, but to support those other leaders in schools as well about doing the right thing. And I think giving that license to, if it's working, great, let's do more of it and work out how we can sustain it. And if it's not, let's not do it. Has actually been really, really powerful in that piece of work.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And again, I just love the mix of strategy and culture with regards to all of this as well. There was one thing that I just wanted to touch on as well, is that idea of when you've got this one model and you're really purposeful with it, it almost reduces that cognitive load for the teachers. And what I've got from this session is that love for the students, but also care for your teachers as well, to make sure you don't put too much work on them. But it's that strategy behind it as well, which is fantastic. Right, we've got loads of different questions, but I'm going to have to make this our last one. Otherwise, we'll be rushing for the next one. So bear with me for a second. You've answered that one. The good thing is you've been answering quite a few of them as you've been going through as well. I'll finish on a slightly different one, but feel free to add to it. Do you have a school, libraries, and a professional librarian employed within them? So it's a bit more of a general one about the reading culture.
So in all of our schools, there is a school library provision. We manage that financially by either we've had some substantial trust investment in those spaces in schools, because it's been about actually this is a place that we want to put our money to show that it's really important. But also we've made use of all sorts of different funding streams, whether that be, and we share those across the trust. So if somebody finds, oh, I found a seam of grant money, we all jump on it quite happily and share each other's successful bids, which is quite helpful. But also in terms of that staffing, so again, it's a varied model depending on school. Everybody has some form of library staffing, but we've also actually taken it as an opportunity to develop our student leadership in our schools as well. So all of our schools have developed school librarians, school reading ambassadors, those kinds of roles to support that piece of work. And actually using our libraries as spaces that aren't just about reading and information gathering. So the school that I'm sitting in at the moment, lunchtime clubs happen. This brilliant crochet club where they make incredible things that happens in our library. Staff go and work in the library. Partly is that this is a place that we come and use ourselves as professionals. So I think that's important. But again, when we go back to that workload piece, it's been actually, if we're going to say this is an important resource, that then let's invest in it. But also, how do we make that sustainable? Well, it's about getting children to take on some of that leadership. And I think going back to that workload piece, preempting a question that's in the chat around the personalised strategies for each year group and students, it is very tailored, but the lack of staff workload comes from using our data to do the who do we target, but also Reading Plus does that working of that personalised bit. Like it makes suggestions to them. Some of we've been deliberate in choosing resource that does some of that tailoring for us once we've got the right target students as well.
Absolutely fantastic. So many pearls there, which are brilliant. Now, I know for a fact people will want to get in contact with you. So are we okay to, or do you live on LinkedIn, social media? Where's the best place to find you?
Yes. So I live on LinkedIn. You can find me there with a deliberately very dark picture, so age proof. So please do get in touch. I'd be more than happy to pick up conversations with people. And I think Daisy's also put some links to Daisy Education. Even that's me personalising Daisy Education. There you go. Daisy Education links in the chat as well.
Fantastic. Alys, it's been a sincere pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone. Can we give our digital round of applause for such a fantastic session? Loads of pearls there. And all that's left for me to say is a massive thank you from all of us at Daisy Education. Please do reach out and celebrate what you're seeing here. Use the handle from X at Read Solutions UK and hashtag IRC25. From all of us at Daisy Education, thank you and take care.
Thanks, everyone.